Step right up and be dazzled, it's time for the dark tales of Yamishibai. Today we will begin the recap with the first short story called Taro-chan. Hatanaka is a rookie police officer who has been assigned to give a lecture on traffic safety at a public assembly. He also has the ability to drive ventriloquist dummies, so he will be giving the presentation alongside his dummy, Taro. The man enters the stage and quickly begins his presentation. Through Taro, he talks about how he likes to ride a bicycle, but warns that he always respects the speed limit, and when crossing a street, it is essential that the cyclist looks both ways. Hatanaka, trying to exemplify, moves the doll's head to the left, but when trying to direct its head to the right, he cannot. The policeman does not understand what is causing this problem, so he forces the structure of the doll until something unknown falls out of its interior. The man then realizes that it was a wooden talisman. He is confused as he had never seen this piece inside his doll. Just then, some children in the audience notice strange behavior in Taro, but before they could say anything, Hatanaka resumes with his presentation. However, the policeman realizes that he is no longer controlling the puppet. Taro begins to move and speak in his own voice. The man is startled to encounter this bizarre situation. However, the audience does not notice this difference, believing it to be part of the performance. Taro looks at Hatanaka and says that he always wanted to talk, but the man wouldn't let him. The doll tells everyone that he always rode his bike at high speed and never looked to the sides, until the day a car came around the corner at high speed. The doll says there was a big noise and soon several people arrived at the scene. While narrating the story, Hatanaka tried his best to get rid of the doll. The audience found it comical that a policeman was fighting with a toy, until the man finally managed to throw Taro off the stage. As he falls to the floor, the audience stops laughing and Taro tells everyone that he is in a lot of pain. So let's move on to the second story, called Kitchen. Mitsuko is a young university student. She walks through the city streets to meet up with her high school friend Ayano. The two meet at Ayano's apartment. She says she will prepare a delicious meal and asks her friend to have tea until everything is ready. Mitsuko says that her friend's apartment is great and even looks new. However, Ayano replies that other people have lived there before, but none of the tenants stayed for long. At that moment, Mitsuko realizes that the air conditioning of the place was emitting a strange noise. After a few seconds, she realizes that the noise, in fact, seems to be the voice of a man. The girl is so fixated with that she cannot take her eyes off the air conditioning. At that moment, an eye appears in the middle of the device. Mitsuko screams and then the light of the place is turned off. The girl comes to the conclusion that there is something wrong with that place, as she feels that she is being watched all the time. Ayano explains that sometimes the power in the building goes out, but says that after a few minutes, it returns to normal. She says she has finished preparing the meal and serves a plate of noodles to her friend. Mitsuko tries to control her fear so as not to scare her friend. However, she notices that a bizarre creature is coming out from inside the kitchen sink. The monster gets closer and closer to the girls. However, Mitsuko realizes that Ayano cannot see it. The girl doesn't know how to tell this to her classmate, but by showing strange behavior, Ayano deduces that Mitsuko is not enjoying the food. Mitsuko replies that it's not about that. The girl tries to say something, but feels even more terrified as the creature approaches the table. Under enormous pressure, Ayano demands that her friend tell her something, but the girl is unable to answer. Ayano stresses over the situation and says that she has always found Mitsuko's personality repugnant. She rages and shouts that their friendship is over. At that moment, the bizarre creature devours Ayano. Mitsuko runs from the scene frightened. She tries to return home, but on the way, she realizes that a gigantic shadow is being formed from her friend's house. Mitsuko is completely paralyzed when she comes across this bizarreness. The shadow, however, grows even larger and covers the entire place. The third story is entitled, Inside. Masamichi returns home after a day at school. He meets up with his mother upon arriving home. The excited little boy tells her that he found a Russian doll in a vacant lot nearby. The woman finds it frightening and says that her son cannot have it. She then decides to get rid of the doll on her own. In the evening, Masamichi talks to his father and informs him that his mother has not yet returned home. The man comforts the boy by stating that the woman was probably doing some shopping. A few seconds later, the woman returns home with the Russian doll in her hands. She just passes by her family and says she is going to her room to sleep. Masamichi finds this strange, but decides not to say anything more. The next day, the little boy hears his mother crying. He quickly leaves his room and runs towards her to try to help her. However, when he finds the woman, he realizes that she is completely normal and stable. He explains that he heard her crying, but she replies that it was just his impression. The boy then goes back to his room and hears laughter from the woman. Masamichi reasons that since the day he brought the doll to his house, his mother has been acting strangely. The next day, the little boy talks to his father about his mother's strange behavior. He tells him that he heard her crying and seconds later heard laughter from her room. The boy's father explains that this could be the television or a radio. At that moment, the woman approaches her family with the doll in her hands. She says she is going to take a shower. Masamichi takes advantage of the situation to go to the bathroom and identify if there is something wrong with the Russian doll. He manages to pick it up again and without hesitation begins to remove its layers. He realizes that while removing the dolls, more and more the toy took on a frightening appearance. When he reached the penultimate layer, he notes that the doll was completely scribbled. Masamichi is paralyzed by this, but realizes that there is still another layer to look at. He then removes the penultimate layer and is faced with what was in the center of the Russian doll. At the same moment, several screams and laughter are heard throughout the house. The father quickly runs to the bathroom to see what happened, but when he arrives on the scene, he identifies that his wife and son are standing next to the doll. He asks if everything is okay, as he heard screams. However, the woman replies that nothing happened. After all, it could have just been his imagination. Our fourth dark story is called Wall Woman. In an apartment complex, a young college student always watches a woman who lives in the building in front. He is completely in love with her, but wonders if she has a boyfriend. The young man always watches her while she is on the balcony of the apartment, and every time he is impressed by her beauty. The young man decides to concentrate and go back to studying. After all, the girl had left the balcony. However, the young man realizes that something bizarre is climbing the front building. He identifies it as an obscure and unknown creature. Quickly the monster reaches the girl's apartment and invades the place. The young man panics because he doesn't know what to do. He hopes that his neighbor is fine and nothing serious has happened. A few seconds later, the woman goes to the balcony of the apartment. The young man feels reassured to see that she is safe and that it may all have been just his imagination. However, the woman begins to demonstrate abnormal behavior. She contorts her body and begins to walk like an animal. She quickly realizes that she is being watched and looks intently in the direction of the young man. The young man gets scared and at the same moment hides. After a few seconds, he looks through the window again and realizes that his neighbor is no longer on the balcony. He closes the curtains of the house and tries to go back to study to forget everything that happened. However, the young man starts to hear a strange noise. He gets up from his chair and can hear that something is moving on the other side of the wall. At that moment, the bathroom door opens by itself. He slowly approaches it to check if there is something wrong. When he gets closer, he notices that there was nothing in the place, so he goes back to the room. The young man decides to rest a little due to all the stress, but realizes that the window of the house was open. He is sure that he did not open it at any time. At that moment, the young man's neighbor appears on the scene with a bizarre appearance and begins to stare at him. We will move on to the fifth story entitled Locker. Katagira is a teenager in love with a young man from her school. She is quite shy and ashamed to say anything to him, so she just watches him from afar. While returning home after the end of classes, the girl hears the conversation of two students. The pair comment on a cupboard that exists on the back floor of the station, rumored to hold a doll, and by placing a photo of their loved one inside the cupboard, the love between the two will instantly blossom. The girl listens to all the conversation and the same day heads to the place. She walks down a long corridor until she finds several lockers in the place. She wonders in which one the doll is. Then, the girl remembers that her beloved wears the shirt 10 in the baseball team. Through this relationship, she decides to open cabinet 10. In doing so, the student is startled to come across a bizarre doll with frightening features. Even in the face of this, the girl puts the picture of the young man next to the doll and asks for everything to go well. The next day, after the end of classes, Kutagira returns to the place to see if something happened. She crosses the entire corridor and opens the closet. The girl is puzzled to realize that the photo she put in place had disappeared. Only the doll was still present in the closet. At that moment, the girl is surprised by the arrival of the young man she is in love with. She is shy about his presence, but they both end up talking about the rumor of the Amario that grants requests. The girl says that she put someone's photo, but when she went to check again, it was no longer in place. Kutagira explains that only the doll is still there. The young man is startled to hear this. He warns that this closet is the wrong one. At the same moment, the closet door opens and the doll was no longer there. The two students are startled by the noise. Then the young man begins to feel severe pain throughout his body. Kutagira does not know what to do, so she just watches him in the face of that frightening situation. A few seconds later, the young man's body is completely crushed by an absurd pressure. His body turns into a large human mass and soon after, that bizarre stuff is thrown into the closet. After that, the door closes and only a laugh can be heard. So let's move on to the sixth story, titled Now Chan. At night, a father plays with his son before bed. The man uses a flashlight to create shadows on the ceiling of the room. He manages to entertain the little boy until the moment he falls asleep. However, during the early hours of the morning, the little boy notices something strange in his room. Taken can see that several shadows are moving alone on the ceiling. He finds it amusing and names the shadow Now. The next day, the boy's mother asks her husband if he knows any Now. He explains that Taken speaks that name only at night and does not understand why this has been happening. The man replies that he does not know any Now either. While they were in the room, the little boy looks at the ceiling and claims that Now is there. The boy's parents quickly look up at the ceiling, but see nothing. Because of this, they believe that Taken is just playing. For this reason, they decide to forget about this matter, even joking about the situation. That early morning, Taken wakes up and observes that Now is moving again, but this time, the little boy is frightened, because the shadow takes the form of a giant face and tries to approach him during the night. However, the bizarre face observes the little boy's mother and approaches her in the wee hours of the morning. The next day, Takun's mother tells her husband that perhaps Now is the youngest friend the man had at university. At that moment, the father, with an expression of terror, recalls that there was someone who was the main reason he married his wife. This someone called Takun's father only once and then passed away alone. Months later, the couple celebrate the arrival of their second child, and name him Now. So let's move on to the seventh story, called Capsule Toy Machine. After a frustrating day at work, a businessman returns home with an extreme feeling of sadness, as he was unable to close any contracts that day. While walking down the street, the man notices a person exhibiting rather strange behavior. He sees that an old man was fanatic about a gashapon machine, which is an automatic vending mechanism. The man then reflects on what was inside the capsules to make someone so fascinated. The businessman continues his way home, but the next day, he passes by the same street and decides to go to the gashapon machine out of sheer curiosity. He notes that it is a normal machine like the others, and then puts in the amount needed to win a capsule. After that, he takes the object in his hands and opens it. He is amazed to see what was inside the capsule. It was an old car-shaped rubber that he lost at school. The man is happy to see his item again. However, without realizing it, his hair turns completely white and some aging traces appear on his face. The businessman gets excited and decides to buy more capsules to find out what he will win. He gets a new capsule and in it comes a miniature doll of John, a dog that the man had when he was still a child. After that, the man's skin begins to age completely and his movements become more restricted. However, this is not enough to stop him. He is curious to know what he will get next, so he buys another capsule. Inside the object, he finds another miniature. It was about Mickey, his best friend from childhood who moved to another place a long time ago. The man claims to miss the time they played together, but without noticing, his own teeth begin to fall out, one at a time. At that moment, a man passes by and finds the old man's behavior strange. He watches for a while and continues on his way home. The old man then tries to buy another capsule, but he no longer has the strength to do so. He falls to the ground and takes his last breath of life. The next day, the man who passed by observes the gashapon machine and wonders what was in the capsules that made the old man so fascinated. Out of curiosity, he approaches the machine and decides to buy a capsule. Our eighth dark story is called Farewell Confession. Ken is a young man who left the city to visit his relatives who lived in a village. He went there to attend the funeral of Endo Shuzu, a relative with whom the young man did not have much contact. Upon arriving at the place, Ken realizes that people are laughing and talking about various subjects. He finds the atmosphere relaxed for a funeral, but quickly meets the wife of the deceased. The woman thanks him for his visit and asks everyone to gather in a house. Ken notes that this is not a normal funeral, as it is something totally different from what he has ever witnessed. The widow then tells the young man that at that funeral, they practice the farewell confession. It is a ritual where a person tells the deceased a secret that he could not tell when he was still alive, and according to the ritual, the confessed sin rises to heaven along with the soul of the deceased. One of the relatives enters the room where the deceased is and reveals to Endo that he had once impregnated his own wife. Then a girl enters the room and confesses that it was she who broke the branch of the plum tree that Endo liked best. Ken quickly feels pressured, as he is the next to continue with the ritual. The young man is a little afraid, but walks to where his deceased relative was lying. The young man sits down next to the perished man and tries to remember some sin to confess. He remembers something from his childhood and tells Endo that he was responsible for the elimination of his dog, as it ended up passing away due to a serious oversight. At that moment, a strong wind enters the place and all the candles go out. Ken is completely freaked out, but quickly pulls himself together and believes it was all just the wind. However, just as he was about to leave the room, the perished man gets up in a rage and asks if it was really true. So let's move on to the ninth and penultimate story, called Amani-san. Osaka is a young teacher who has left Tokyo to teach at a rural high school. She is much admired by her students, so they all want to sit next to her at mealtimes. During lunch, the students smell a rather strange smell, but they soon recognize that it is amani. When the dish is served, all the students begin to devour it immediately. Osaka, on the other hand, is abashed to see that the meal had a strange coloring and a bizarre appearance. She can't eat it and decides to wrap the food in a bag to throw it away after the end of school. At the end of the day, the woman goes to an incinerator, and when trying to throw the amani in the fire, the food moves by itself and ends up being consumed by the flames. Osaka is frightened by that and continues on her way home. During the journey, the teacher finds a restaurant. She decides to enter the place and eat something. After all, she was unable to eat lunch at the school where she works. After entering the establishment and eating a good meal, she hears two people ordering amani to eat. She feels sick just hearing the name of the food, and a few seconds later, she realizes that the two customers were quickly devouring the meal. She then leaves the place feeling very nauseous. The next day, she informs the school principal that she is quite ill and will not be able to work. The woman's mother realizes that she is not at all well, and for that reason, decides to make a nice dinner for her daughter. In the evening, Osaka manages to get better quickly by eating the meal prepared by her mother. However, the woman shows different behavior. With a smile on her face, Osaka's mother states that the girl was unable to eat amani at school. For that reason, she mixed the junk together with some vegetables for the girl to eat. Osaka starts to feel bad, but quickly her expression changes, and upon seeing a pan full of amani, she quickly devours the meal that was on her plate. Our last story today is titled, Bugged. An angry man always writes an account of what happened in his day in his personal diary. On July 28th, he writes that his boss gave him a scolding in front of everyone, but that was ridiculous. After all, he is older than his own boss, so he had no right to question him. While writing, the man is bothered by the presence of insects flying around the lamp in his room. He finds it annoying, but goes back to writing again. On August 10th, the man writes in his notebook that his coworkers can't work properly. The only thing they know how to do is gossip about the lives of others. At that moment, the man is annoyed by the presence of the flying insects. For this reason, he lights an incense to drive them away and goes back to writing about how bad his coworkers are. A few days later, the man reports in his diary that he returned home in the rain, and on the way came across a couple sharing the same umbrella. He writes that he was annoyed to see this disgusting scene. At the same moment, the insects started flying around the lamp in the room. Without patience, the man uses an insecticide to eliminate them and then burns the two moths that irritated him so much. The next day, the man reports that everything annoys him: people, insects, and his body. He takes a mirror in his hands and decides to observe his eyes, as he is feeling something different in them. As he does so, he realizes that there are several maggots inside his eyes. The man is frightened by this, but decides to write again, reaffirming that everything annoys him. The insects continue to plague him, so the man eliminates several of them with the insecticide, burns numerous moths, and uses a large amount of the toxic product in his room. A few hours later, he had lost his life and his whole body was going into a state of decomposition, and some insects decided that they would live inside. His last written word was, "help," but he was no longer angry enough to say anything. So what did you think of these stories? Leave it in the comments below. And if you liked the video, like it and subscribe for more anime recaps. See you next time.